Torn hearts. As Kaito gazed at his reflection in the mirror while bathing, he couldn't help but be amazed by the transformation that had occurred. His once brownish golden hair had taken on a stunning shade of pure gold when it grew back. It felt somewhat surreal to him, but there was no denying that it looked rather impressive. Once he had finished his refreshing bath, Kaito emerged with a towel wrapped around his waist, ready for a snack. As he strolled into the kitchen, he expected to be alone during his customary midnight kitchen raid. However, to his surprise, he found Carla already there, diligently chopping vegetables. A mischievous idea crossed his mind, and he couldn't resist the temptation for a little playful mischief. Silently, he crept up behind her, wearing only a towel, still slightly damp from his bath. Suddenly, he embraced her from behind, his arms wrapping around her soft body. Carla let out a surprised shriek as she felt Kaito's warm, slightly damp, bare chest pressed against her back. She had attempted to maintain some distance from him, particularly after their passionate night together. She had been feeling overwhelmed with guilt. However, Kaito was unswayed by her reservations and continued to tease her body and mind. With a jump, Carla freed herself from Kaito's embrace, and he released her easily, still reveling in his playful mood. Yet what she didn't foresee was the unintended consequence of her quick retreat. Her hand, in the process of breaking free, caught Kaito's towel, pulling it open and causing it to drop to the ground, leaving Kaito standing there totally naked, his playful grin undiminished. Big. Carla's embarrassment sent a fiery blush across her entire body as she couldn't believe her own reaction to Kaito's naked form. Her eyes were instinctively drawn to him, a magnetic pull she couldn't resist. Kaito took a step closer, and Carla, flustered, took a step back. But her retreat was short-lived, as she quickly realized there was nothing behind her except the wall. Kaito leaned in closer, one hand blocking any potential escape route. He had effectively pinned her against the wall. "And no, Kaito," she stammered, her voice quivering. Kaito's face inched nearer, his playful eyes locking onto hers. Carla's heart raced, and before she could protest further, she felt Kaito's lips press against hers. Her initial panic turned into a whirlwind of emotions as she tried to escape, but Kaito's hand firmly held her face. She surrendered to the unexpected passion that surged between them. Their kiss deepened, tongues exploring one another's mouths for what felt like an eternity. When they finally separated, it was only because Carla needed to catch her breath. A long, glistening string of saliva connected their tongues. Kaito grinned, his eyes still locked onto Carla's. "Did I catch you off guard again, Carla?" Carla's face felt like it was on fire as she lowered her head to hide her embarrassment. Kaito chuckled and, after picking up his fallen towel, he playfully patted her butt, causing her to blush even more. After Kaito walked away, Carla remained in the kitchen, her thoughts in turmoil. She couldn't help but feel guilty about her husband. The guilt gnawed at her, but to distract herself, she focused on the task at hand. Dinner wasn't going to make itself. With a sigh and renewed determination, she picked up the knife and began chopping vegetables, trying to put the events behind her and focus on the simple act of preparing her meal. Morning. Carla's eyes slowly fluttered open, and for a moment, she couldn't quite believe the luxury of the bed she was lying in. It was so comfortable that she had fallen asleep the moment her head hit the pillow. She stretched and yawned, feeling more rested than she had in a long time. As she walked into the main room, she was greeted by the sight of Kaito engaged in a rigorous exercise routine. His muscles glistened with sweat, and she couldn't help but feel a slight blush rise to her cheeks. Clearing her throat, she asked with genuine curiosity, "Kaito, why are you exercising so intensely when you're already so strong?" Kaito pushed himself up from the floor, completing his 69th push-up, and greeted Carla with a warm smile. "Good morning," he said cheerfully. Taking a break to drink some water, he continued, "Carla, what you saw before was more of a fluke. I might have had a moment of strength, but it's not something I can consistently rely on. Don't expect me to be manhandling 15-meter titans in the future. It's a good way to end up in a titan's belly." He chuckled as he took another swig of water. The last thing he wanted was to become the village's resident titan wrestler. The mental image of him in a wrestling outfit, ready to take on a giant titan in a luchador match, made him smirk. Maybe they should start taking bets on him. Carla nodded in understanding, her gaze lingering on Kaito's toned physique. She couldn't help but feel a strange mixture of admiration and fear. It was as if he was hiding something dark within him. "I see," she said finally, her voice slightly hesitant. "But what about that power you used to save me? That was no fluke." Kaito's smile faded slightly. "That was different," he said. "I had to use it to survive. But it's not something I can control, and it's not without its risks." You saw it, didn't you? He had no desire to get up close and personal with a Titan. He'd seen enough action movies to know that heroes usually didn't come out of those situations unscathed. But this damn world doesn't give a choice. Carla remembered how his hand had rotten in seconds after he tanked the Titan's attack. After a moment of silence, Carla asked about the elephant in the room. So, Kaito. About that night. Kaito looked at her as if expecting it, a playful smile reappearing on his face. Oh yes, that blissful night. Carla looked away, guilt in her heart toward her husband, Grisha. Why yes. Let's forget about it. What if I don't want to? Kaito said mischievously. Carla went silent, her mind racing. She had known that Kaito wouldn't let that night pass by so easily, but she hadn't been prepared for this. Oh, I should mention one thing, Kaito suddenly spoke up as he got up. Grisha will probably be arriving in Trost soon. Carla spun around, surprise and dread surging through her. What? Grisha is coming here? Kaito nodded casually. With everything that's happened in Shiganshina, it makes sense he'd try to find you and Eren. Carla's mind raced, imagining the impossibility of facing her husband after what she'd done. How could they possibly go back to their normal family life? The wounds were too deep now. She felt sick with apprehension. Sensing her panic, Kaito approached and placed a hand on her shoulder. Remember, though, you can't reveal yourself to him. As far as he knows, Carla died back in Shiganshina. Carla recoiled from his touch, tears welling up in her eyes. How can you expect me to do that? Stand by while my husband grieves for me, thinking I'm dead. Pretend everything is fine while our family is torn apart. Kaito's expression softened. He hesitated, then gently wiped a tear from her cheek. Hey, I know this sucks. I wish there was an easy way to fix everything. He met her watery gaze. But you're smart. You understand why we can't change what's supposed to happen. As much as it hurts, your family will get through this. Eren and Mikasa will look out for each other. Carla closed her eyes, lip quivering. Kaito pulled her into an embrace. I'm here for you too, he murmured. We'll figure this out together. Resting her head against his chest, Carla cried quietly as Kaito held her. After a few moments, she took a shaky breath. I know you're right. It's just so painful. I feel like I'm betraying them. Kaito stroked her hair soothingly. I get it. But it's temporary. We can find other ways to help Eren and the others. And I'll always be here to lift your spirits. And your body too. Kaito didn't speak the latter part aloud. He playfully tilted up her chin. No more tears now. How about I make us some tea, and we can talk? It'll be all right, I promise. Carla managed a small, sad smile. Even now, he could still make her feel just a little bit better. Okay, she nodded. Tea would be nice. After finishing their tea, Carla took a deep breath. I need to go check on Eren and Mikasa again. Seeing them yesterday as Irene was so difficult. Eren looked so heartbroken thinking I was dead. Kaito nodded understandingly. I know it's hard, but you're doing the right thing visiting them in disguise. Just be cautious. I made them some food to take, Carla said. Hopefully, that will lift their spirits a little. She stood up, gathering her things. Kaito came over and tilted her chin up, giving her a soft kiss on the lips. Carla flushed, caught off guard. What was that for? She asked, flustered. Just helping maintain the illusion, Kaito replied with a casual grin. In truth, he didn't need to kiss her, but he enjoyed catching her by surprise. Carla looked skeptical but didn't push the issue. She headed out the door towards the refugee settlement where Eren, Mikasa, and Armin were staying. Kaito watched her go, a vague unease nagging at him. With a sigh, he turned back inside, hoping Carla's visit would go smoothly and she'd return safely. Here comes another. Your comment is the motivation for my creation. Give me more motivation. NightSpectra_tot creators thoughts. 1 comments 0 vote. Download the app for greater interaction. You can chat with me about my writing experience apart from the comments section. NightSpectra_tot. Download app now. Titan sighted. Carla approached the refugee settlement, butterflies swirling in her stomach. She wove through the crowds until she spotted Eren, Mikasa, and Armin huddled together near a shelter. Taking a deep breath to steel herself, she walked up to them. Hi kids, it's Irene again. I brought you some food. Mikasa nodded in greeting while Eren stared blankly at the ground, lost in his grief. Carla's heart broke seeing her son like this. Armin gave her a small smile. That's really nice of you, thanks Irene. We appreciate you checking on us. He gently nudged Eren. She brought food, isn't that thoughtful? Eren mumbled something unintelligible, not meeting Carla's eyes. Mikasa kept a hand comfortingly on his shoulder. I know things are so hard right now, Carla said gently. But you have each other. You'll get through this. Armin's smile faltered. I hope so. Eren isn't taking it very well. I'm worried about him. Carla blinked back tears, resisting the urge to embrace Eren. Just stay by his side, she encouraged Mikasa. Turning to Armin, she added, and you help too. Your friendship gives him strength, even if he can't feel it right now. Armin nodded, determination entering his eyes. You're right. We'll be there for him no matter what. Carla lingered a bit longer, making small talk and wishing she could reveal her true identity. Eventually, she had to force herself to say goodbye. As she walked back, tears escaped down her cheeks. But she took comfort in knowing Eren had his friends beside him. Hours later, Carla returned home, barely holding back tears. When Kaito asked what happened, she couldn't contain herself anymore. She rushed into his arms, sobbing into his chest. Between gasped breaths, she told him about Eren's despondent state and how painful it was to see him like that. Kaito held her close, gently stroking her hair to soothe her. Eventually, Carla's sobs quieted as she fell into an exhausted sleep in his arms. Later that night, Kaito woke Carla with urgency in his voice. Grisha just entered the city. He's not far from here. Carla bolted upright, suddenly alert. Grisha is here. Please, can I see him? She pleaded. Kaito considered for a moment before nodding. All right, but we must be quick and cautious. In one smooth motion, he swept Carla into his arms. She yelped in surprise as he dashed to the window and leapt outside, bounding from rooftop to rooftop with preternatural speed and grace. They arrived at the refugee settlement just in time to witness Grisha storming off with Eren in tow. Carla gasped. Kaito watched with satisfaction as events aligned with the timeline he knew. Perfect, he muttered under his breath. This was a pivotal moment. Carla turned to him, eyes wide. Where is he taking Eren? What's happening? All in due time, Kaito replied cryptically. For now, they could only observe from the shadows and let destiny take its course. Carla and Kaito silently followed Grisha and Eren deep into the forest. Grisha was ranting and raving, his personality suddenly shifting erratically. Carla watched in bewildered horror as Grisha injected Eren with a strange substance. Eren began transforming into a gigantic, twisted titan. Carla couldn't suppress a shriek of horror. Grisha whirled around, shock plastered across his face as he saw Carla alive. Run! Kaito yelled, pulling the shell-shocked Carla away just as Titan Eren charged. They fled through the trees, with Grisha staggering behind. See Carla! He exclaimed in shock. His wife. She was alive. As Kaito fled out of range of Eren, its attention shifted. They have escaped. But they witnessed from afar as Titan Eren turned back toward Grisha. Too weak to flee, Grisha fell to his knees, his 13 years as a Titan shifter had ended. He could only watch helplessly as Eren's Titan grabbed and devoured him, his eyes filled with unanswered questions and a certain relief. Kaito had to give it to the man. Even though death swallowed his consciousness, he didn't let out even a whimper, loving his family to the end. Almost making him feel bad for seducing Carla, almost okay. He will still keep doing it. Carla sobbed into Kaito's shoulder, overwhelmed by the nightmarish scene. Kaito held her trembling body. A miscalculation on his part. How could he not expect a mother to cry when her son transforms into an ugly-ass Titan? Still, the mistake did not change his future plans. As Carla watched with bated breath, her heart pounding loudly in her chest, she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Eren's Titan form began to steam and dissipate, leaving behind a fainted, frail Eren. Her motherly instincts kicked in, and she ran to his side, ignoring everything else. Kaito, not intervening, followed behind her more slowly. He couldn't help but watch with a certain detachment as Carla picked up Eren, tears streaming down her face. It was all going according to his plan, and it was chilling how well it was working. Soon, Keith Sadis arrived at the scene, his eyes falling on Carla, cradling the unconscious Eren. The man beside them was unknown to him. He assumed they were responsible for what had happened to Eren and approached them with a scowl, his voice demanding answers. What did you do to him? He snapped, his suspicion evident in his tone. Kaito quickly jumped in to provide an explanation, his demeanor composed and innocent. Irene here is Carla's cousin, he explained, pointing to her. We were walking in the forest when we heard voices yelling and saw a flash of yellow lightning. When we came here, we found Eren like this. Keith's suspicion was still evident in his expression, and he continued his interrogation. Was anyone else with you? What happened to Grisha? Kaito, with a calm and collected tone, replied, there was no one else here. We found Aren alone. Irene remained silent, letting Kaito handle the conversation. Keith couldn't help but raise an eyebrow at this new development. Carla never mentioned having a cousin, he noted. Irene, with a feigned sadness in her voice, spoke up, Carla and I haven't met for the past 15 years. We've only communicated through letters. Keith's suspicion lingered, but he decided to involve the military police in the investigation. It's best if the authorities look into this, he said, addressing Carla and Kaito. Leave Aren at the refugee settlement with his friends. The military police can sort this out. Irene opened her mouth as if to protest, but Kaito gave her a discreet squeeze on the hand, silently urging her not to challenge Keith's decision. After leaving Aren, Carla and Kaito returned to their house. Carla didn't want to leave her son, but Keith's presence had made it clear that they needed to step back for now. The weight of the recent events bore heavily on her heart, and as soon as Keith was out of sight, Carla's emotions overtook her once again, and she began to cry uncontrollably, overwhelmed by grief and confusion at what had happened to Grisha and Aren. Kaito, ever the supportive figure, took her into his arms and held her as she wept. He provided comforting words and gentle reassurance, trying to soothe her grief-stricken soul. Between sobs and gasps for air, Carla finally managed to ask the question that had been haunting her. Why? She choked out between sobs. Why did Grisha turn Aren into that monster? And then? He just let himself get eaten. I don't understand. Kaito's heart ached to see her pain. I know, it's unbelievable. But we will figure this out, I promise you, he said softly. Exhausted, Carla continued weeping in Kaito's arms. He rocked her back and forth, murmuring comforting words until she eventually cried herself to sleep. Kaito knew the investigation into Grisha's death would be rigorous, given his popularity and skills within the inner walls. He understood the importance of not revealing the whole truth to Carla at once. The story needed to unfold naturally. The next morning, Carla awoke to find herself wrapped in someone's embrace. The warmth and sense of security she felt were comforting, but when she opened her eyes, she was startled to find Kaito's face so close to her own. She was lying on his chest, and the memories of the events of the previous day came rushing back. As Carla distanced herself from Kaito, her gaze was filled with inner turmoil. She couldn't bear to look at him, not after the storm of emotions that had raged through her the previous day. Her heart ached with the weight of her actions and the loss of her husband, Grisha. She felt a deep sense of betrayal and guilt, and it was as though the weight of the world had descended upon her shoulders. Kaito, while aware of Carla's inner turmoil, gave her space, allowing her to process the flood of emotions that had gripped her. He understood the complexities of the situation and knew that he couldn't push her in any direction. After a long, heavy silence, Carla finally spoke, her voice trembling with emotion. I don't know how to face what happened. The loss of Grisha, my actions, and you. Kaito nodded sympathetically, his eyes reflecting understanding. Carla, I can't pretend to know the pain you're going through, but I want you to know that I'm here for you. You don't have to face this alone. Carla's tear-filled eyes met Kaito's, and she whispered, I just need time, Kaito. Time to grieve, time to understand, time to find a way to move forward. Kaito nodded once more, his heart filled with empathy. Take all the time you need, Carla. I'll be here when you're ready. I must say, this MC is quite a scummy character, isn't he? So I am pumping chapters like a pimp. I would really appreciate it if you guys leave comments, ratings, or reviews. It's really fun for me to go through all of them. And also I have made some major edits in chapter 1, so old readers should take a look at that. Sorry for the deleted comments. NightSpectra _ creators thoughts. 9 comments 0 vote. Revelations. In the following days, Kaito was a source of support and comfort for Carla, offering her a shoulder to lean on and a listening ear whenever she needed it. He ensured she had the space and support she needed to heal. As Carla, disguised as Irene, continued her visits to Aren and kept up the pretense of being Carla's cousin, she couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and sadness. She was relieved that Aren had no memory of the night Grisha had turned him into a Titan. Her heart ached at the thought of sparing the young boy the terrible memory of that horrifying transformation. She knew it was a heavy burden to bear, and she couldn't bring herself to reveal the truth. Days turned into weeks, and Carla's visits to Aren and his friends became a semblance of normalcy in their lives. However, Kaito was cautious, limiting the frequency of her visits to avoid raising suspicion or disrupting the timeline. The retaliation for saving her and what he had done in the basement hasn't come. But Kaito knew causality was bitch that doesn't forgive, doesn't forget. Something bad is coming in the future. He could feel it. Surprisingly, Eren's mental state seemed more stable with Carla's presence as Irene. His hatred for Titans remained as strong as ever, which puzzled Kaito. After all, the Titans hadn't been responsible for his mother's death. Instead, a man had kidnapped her, and he had gestured that he would kill her. In Kaito's mind, it was only logical for Eren to hate that man more than the Titans. But it almost seemed like Eren's intense hatred for Titans was deeply ingrained, akin to the canon Eren. He was getting a nagging feeling that something else was at play here. In one of those days, he was brought to an interrogation chamber by military police. As a particularly arrogant and nosy investigator was questioning him, Kaito decided to have a little fun. The investigator sat across from Kaito, his chest puffed out with an air of self-importance. He leaned forward and pointed his finger at Kaito. "You're hiding something, and I intend to find out what it is. Grisha Yeager's disappearance was suspicious, and we won't rest until we get to the truth." Kaito raised an eyebrow and leaned in closer, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, I'm hiding something, am I? What could that be?" He paused, his eyes briefly shifting to a hypnotic shade of red. The lamps flickered for a moment. The investigator's bravado quickly evaporated. "Well, we have reasons to believe you might be connected to some unauthorized activities," the investigator stammered. Kaito couldn't resist a sly grin. "Unauthorized activities? My dear friend, I assure you, I am as innocent as a newborn lamb." The room grew colder as Kaito's gaze darkened, and his demeanor shifted. He leaned in even closer, and a sinister grin crept across his face. "Let me show you something." As he finished speaking, he made his fingers elongate further, and the room was filled with the sound of claws scraping against the table. He slowly retracted his lips to reveal his unnaturally sharp fangs and allowed his eyes to glow crimson. The officer's face turned pale, and he couldn't hold it any longer. In a fit of fear, he stood up, but his legs gave way, and he fell back into his chair, leaving a wet spot on the seat. Kaito reveled in his dramatic performance, ensuring they would never cross him again. The investigator, now trembling with fear, quickly stood up. "I think we're done here. No need to trouble you further, sir." "Very wise, now scram." As the investigator practically sprinted out of the room, Kaito couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. It was remarkable how a little dramatic flair and a touch of the unknown could make even the bravest individuals question their resolve. Kaito and Carla's relationship continued to evolve, marked by Kaito's relentless teasing and Carla's growing acceptance of his affections. Hugs were now a common occurrence, and Carla had resigned herself to Kaito's playful antics. His kisses still left her flustered, much to Kaito's delight. He couldn't help but savor the way her cheeks flushed, finding it endearing. Sometimes, Kaito would sneak into Carla's room at night, slipping under the covers and cuddling with her. Their nights together offered a sense of warmth and comfort that Carla had never expected. Despite the unusual circumstances that had brought them together, she was starting to cherish these moments. Carla's greatest source of distress was Eren's unwavering determination to join the Survey Corps. Mikasa and Armin stood by him, supporting his decision. Carla had been powerless to stop him even when she was his mother, and now her attempts to dissuade him from his dangerous path had only led to heated arguments and strained silence. "You couldn't stop him when you were his mom. Do you think you can now?" Kaito remarked, offering a perspective that stung with the truth. Carla had reluctantly accepted that she could no longer change Eren's mind, fearing that further insistence would only damage their relationship. She knew that the future she once knew was slipping further from her grasp, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of helplessness and frustration. The training corps joining date was approaching, with just a week left before entry started. Like every day, Carla was cleaning the house like a diligent housewife. Then suddenly, Kaito pulled her, leading to both of them falling on the long cushioned chair that Kaito called a couch. She was now sitting on his lap as he continued to tickle her, laughter filling the room. Then, with a dramatic declaration, Kaito shared his own surprising news. "Carla, I will be joining the training corps with Eren." Carla gave him a look that seemed to say, "Are you serious?" It was clear that she thought he was being rather ridiculous. Trying not to hurt Kaito's feelings, she responded with a soothing tone, "I know you might have a passion for that, but aren't you a bit too old for it?" Fuck. Carla thought he was cursing because she had burst his dream bubble, but she didn't know it was for an entirely different reason. Kaito had just realized that he never deactivated the illusory magic that had changed his appearance since he had met Carla. Carla really thinks he is older than 20 years. He was getting quite scared now. Panic set in as he stuttered, Hey, Carla, can you close your eyes for a sec? A bit puzzled, Carla complied with his small request. Her body felt a slight shift, and Kaito finally said, open your eyes. When she did, Kaito swore he had never heard such a loud shriek in his life, both present and last one counting. What? You, Kaito. Where? Her brain utterly glitched. She couldn't believe her own eyes and desperately wanted to deny the obvious truth. The boy she now saw in front of her had a striking resemblance to Kaito, except he looked about 14 years old. Just moments ago, she had been comfortably seated on Kaito's lap, and now it was this boy's lap she was on. As if to further challenge her sense of reality, the boy, who sounded exactly like Kaito, spoke up with a nervous stutter, L like what you see. Dropping another one for you guys. I just realized that I haven't described how the Mac looks till now. We'll probably upload a picture on the auxiliary volume later. Enjoy the chaos. NightSpectra _ creators thoughts. 7 comments 0 vote. 3-step guide to sue the woman. Why you are. Kaito. Carla asks, her brain still catching up with the bizarre reality. In flesh and soul, yes, Kaito shrugs nervously. There was a moment of silence, after which Carla asks, how old are you? Rivers of sweat dripped down from his face. He cautiously answered, 14. Another minute of silence, before Carla speaks in a low voice, the tempest of rage barely holding back, so you are telling me. I have been doing all those things with a 14-year boy. Barely older than my son. Carla's head was emitting steam, making Kaito doubt if Carla was a Titan shifter for a moment. His survival instincts kicked in, and he decided to give her a bear hug, even though she was wriggling like a fish on a hook. Hey, Carla, chill. Kaito exclaimed, attempting to restrain her. But Carla was on a one-way train to Fariasville, and she wasn't making any stops. Let me go. You lied to me. Carla yelled, her voice wavering with anger and disappointment. Tears were welling up, and it was clear that Kaito had some serious splaining to do. Wait, Carla. Kaito said, trying to calm the tempest he'd unleashed. I can explain. You see, this is just a little magical mishap. Carla's confusion and anger were not subsiding, and Kaito knew he was in the hot seat. Amidst Carla's justified wrath, Kaito's mind raced to come up with a plausible explanation, even if it was a bit on the absurd side. You see, I am 14 but not actually 14. Kaito blurted out, his face planted in his palm. He quickly realized that this explanation was about as sturdy as a cardboard house in a storm. But he couldn't back down now. In a desperate bid to save his skin, he decided to place the blame squarely on the shoulders of his vampire condition. It's a vampire thing. I'm 14 in vampire years, not human years, he said with an earnest look. It was a delicate lie, woven with threads of desperation, and he could only hope that Carla would buy it. He couldn't tell her the truth about his origins. Imagine if he tells her that he is actually from another world and was transmigrated to this world. And also you don't really exist, and neither does your world, it's all just someone's imagination. Feeling sad about your husband? Don't worry, your sufferings were just created to entertain some creatures in that world. That seems like a surefire way to light a nuke under his ass. And that's also ignoring the possibility of her falling into a midlife existential crisis. Kaito noticed the lingering doubt in Carla's eyes. He needed to make his story a bit more convincing. Look, Carla, I never told you my real age because I didn't want you to be scared. I'm a vampire, and our ages work a bit differently. I didn't want you to think I was a child, but I also didn't want to reveal my true age because I've been a vampire for a long time. Carla looked at him, still a bit skeptical. Vampires? Really? Kaito nodded, sticking to his fabricated tale. Yes, and it's not something I can easily share with others. You're the first person I've ever told. Carla seemed to mull it over. So, you're saying you're a 14-year-old vampire? Kaito smiled, relieved that she was buying into his story. Yes, exactly. And that's why I look different in my vampire form. Carla let out a sigh and leaned back, appearing to accept his explanation. Well, you really scared me with that sudden change. Just please, don't hide things like this from me anymore. Kaito nodded fervently. I promise, Carla. I'll be more open with you from now on. And with that, Kaito had managed to dodge a potentially catastrophic situation with some quick thinking and a liberal dose of creative storytelling. For some time, Kaito didn't say anything, letting Carla process all that. So, as I was telling you earlier, he began, a hint of excitement in his voice, I've decided to join the training corps with Eren this time. Carla paused in her chores, looking at Kaito with a mixture of surprise and concern. But why, Kaito? She questioned, a furrow forming on her brow. You're already so strong. Kaito let out a weary sigh, the weight of his decision evident in his posture. I appreciate the compliment, Carla, but I'm really not as strong as you think. I've told you this before. Carla nodded slowly, understanding his need to prove himself. I see, she replied. But I still worry. I couldn't stop Eren from joining, and now you too. A mischievous grin curled on Kaito's lips. He leaned closer to her, his eyes sparkling with playful intent. Is it because you can't bear the thought of living without me? He teased. Carla's cheeks flushed a deep shade of pink as she turned her gaze away. And no, it's not like that, she stammered. Kaito couldn't help but chuckle at her shyness. He reached out and gently lifted her chin, causing her to look back into his eyes. Come on, Carla, he whispered, his voice soft and tender. We share the same bed. You don't have to be so shy. Carla's face turned an even deeper shade of red as she tried to stammer a response. I mean. I just don't want to see you get hurt. Kaito's teasing smile softened as he pulled her closer. I know, Carla. I appreciate your concern. But I have my reasons. I want to protect you and everyone else, just like Eren does. Carla's cheeks turned an even deeper shade of red, and she pretended to be suddenly engrossed in a nearby vase of flowers. Kaito, you're impossible. Kaito laughed heartily, enjoying her flustered state. He gently pulled her close and whispered in her ear, I know you'd miss me too much if I weren't around. Carla couldn't help but smile despite her embarrassment. She leaned into him, her voice barely above a whisper, maybe just a little. Carla sighed, realizing that Kaito had made up his mind. Just promise me you'll be careful out there, okay? Kaito chuckled as Carla's head rested against his chest. Don't worry, Carla, he reassured her. While the training will be 3 years, the camp is near Trost. I promise I'll find a way to sneak off and see you frequently. Carla couldn't help but smile at the thought of seeing him often. She quickly composed herself and raised a concerned question, but, Kaito, won't it be dangerous if you get caught? Kaito gazed into her big, expressive eyes and flashed a smug grin. Do you really think they can catch your daring, dashing jester? He replied with a twinkle in his eye. Carla couldn't help but laugh at his confidence. I guess not, she conceded, her worries momentarily pushed aside by Kaito's boundless charm. Night before departure. Amidst the dimly lit room, a subtle tension hung in the air as Carla and Kaito shared their last night together before Kaito would leave for the training corps. Carla's anxiety about his departure fueled her desire to be closer to him, to forget the impending separation. Their kisses were passionate, fiery even, each one echoing with the unspoken longing that had built up between them. Kaito, Carla breathed, her voice trembling. Please don't go. Kaito's eyes were filled with a mix of desire and tenderness as he caressed her cheek. I have to do this, Carla. It's important. With a sense of urgency and desperation, Kaito began to peel away Carla's clothing, layer by layer. The room was filled with a hushed symphony of their whispered breaths and the soft rustling of fabric. Are you sure? Carla asked, her voice heavy with vulnerability. Kaito kissed her gently, his lips trailing down her neck. I'm sure about one thing, Carla. I love you. But then, amidst their heated moments, Carla gently pressed her hand against Kaito's chest, signaling him to pause. Kaito, she said, her eyes searching his, I need time to heal. He nodded, understanding her unspoken words. I'm here for you, Carla. I'll wait as long as it takes. With the understanding and patience that only deep affection can bring, Kaito held her close, allowing their breathing to slow, and their hearts to find a steady rhythm. Today, finally after many days I woke up before afternoon. I have uploaded pictures of Kaito in both his forms in auxiliary chapter, check it out. Also I am thinking of adding in characters info chapter with their illustration, should I do it or not? Training Corps. Inside the training corps grounds, a group of new cadets stood at attention, their faces a mixture of anxiety and determination. Among them was Kaito, his thoughts occasionally drifting back to Carla's body, a frustratingly near miss from the previous night. The famous trio, Eren, Mikasa, and Armin, were one row away from him. As they waited, Commandant Keith Shaddis, the grizzled former Scout Regiment commander, paced in front of them with a stern expression. He intended to address the new recruits and set the tone for their training. Listen up, you miserable lot. Shaddis's voice reverberated across the training grounds, causing a few cadets to flinch. You think you're here to play soldier, to enjoy a simple life within these walls. Well, I'm here to shatter that illusion. He slowly approached a blonde boy, Armin. Hey, you there. Who the hell are you? Armin Arlelt, from Shiganshina district. Armin replied, small beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Shadis scrutinized him with narrowed eyes. I see. That's a ridiculous name. Did your parents give it to you? Armin answered, my grandfather did, sir. Arlert. Shadis continued with his harsh questioning, directing it at the cadets one by one. Kaito paid little attention to the introductions of the others, knowing the ones that truly mattered. In his assessment, the rest were essentially expendable characters with little screen time, doomed to meet the unfortunate fates of becoming Titan snacks. During this time, he couldn't help but cast a sly glance at the main female characters. With a nod of approval, he marveled at the level of detail the world creator had invested in their appearances. Mikasa possessed a distinct Asian allure. Her long, flowing black hair and focused expression made her an ethereal beauty, a veritable SNU goddess. Historia, also known as Krista, exuded a gentle aura with European features that contrasted with her seemingly demure presence. Ymir, with her freckles and a certain, take-no-nonsense, vibe, appeared to hail from a Slavic nation. Her rebellious spirit only added to her allure. Annie, however, was in a league of her own. Kaito found himself at a loss for words as he gawked at her extraordinary beauty, characterized by distinct Germanic features. Hot was an understatement. She was absolutely captivating. As Kaito continued to slyly admire the female cast, his gaze was suddenly blocked by a looming presence. He looked up to see Instructor Shadis, a stern expression etched onto his rugged face. Shadis' steely gaze locked onto Kaito, and without missing a beat, he demanded, name. Kaito, acting as if caught off guard, stammered, Kaito, sir. Shadis raised an eyebrow, his tone laced with sarcasm. Kaito, is it? Well, Kaito, it appears you've mastered the art of ogling rather quickly. Kaito smirked, his reply filled with sly humor. Well, sir, they do say observation is a crucial skill for a soldier. I'm just getting a head start. Shadis, his anger evident on his face, said, is that so? 50 rounds. Begin now. Once he was done with Kaito, he moved on to the next candidate, Sasha Brous, who had been standing behind Kaito. Kaito, as he moved toward the track to complete his punishment, couldn't help but take a glance at her. Sasha had a mess of red hair that fell in unruly waves around her face. Her skin was lightly tanned. Her standard training uniform did little to conceal her athletic figure. Shadis turned his attention to Sasha and demanded to know who she was. Sasha, with a hint of nervousness but a determined look, promptly introduced herself. Sasha Blouse from Dopper Village, on the south side of Wall Rose, sir. Sasha Blouse. Shadis' anger flared when he noticed something unusual in her hand. What is that you're holding in your right hand? He asked, his voice growing stern. Sasha's expression was surprisingly innocent as she replied, a steamed potato, sir. I found one in the cookhouse that was ready to eat, so I couldn't help myself. The instructor was utterly baffled by her response. You stole it. Why? He questioned, struggling to understand her logic. I felt it would be a waste to let it get cold, so I gave it shelter in my stomach, she explained. Shadis's face was still confused. Why did you decide to eat it now? Now it was Sasha whose face showed the expression she was trying to understand what the instructor was saying. Sir, are you asking why we eat food? Then, after a moment of contemplation, Sasha broke the potato in half and offered Shadis the smaller portion with a conflicted expression. Here, half. Shadis stared at the potato fragment she offered with a blank, dark expression, seemingly at a loss for words. Well, in short, he got a punishment buddy with him now. Kaito continued to jog at a leisurely pace, his stamina seemingly endless. He glanced back at the red-haired girl, Sasha, who was huffing and puffing, trying to keep up. She had a determined look on her face, but her endurance was clearly no match for Kaito's. Come on, potato, just 3 more rounds, Kaito encouraged her, maintaining a relaxed stride. Even without tapping into his vampiric strength, the physical exertion was almost effortless for him. Sasha struggled to keep up, her breaths ragged. Ha! 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 She panted, her face flushed. Meanwhile, in the distance, Connie, Marco, Reiner, and Berthold observed the ongoing punishment. Connie, in particular, was fascinated by Kaito's seemingly boundless energy. Is the potato girl in blonde still running? Connie inquired, his eyes fixed on the 2 cadets completing laps around the training ground. Apparently, yeah, Marco confirmed, watching as Kaito and Sasha continued their punishment. That guy isn't tired at all, is he? Connie noted. He had spotted Kaito running earlier, and to his amazement, the young cadet appeared just as fresh now as he did then. I don't think so, Marco agreed. Did you see the way the potato girl snarled at the commander when he told her she wouldn't be getting dinner tonight? He chuckled at the memory. Connie pondered Marco's question. Do you think they both are wildlings? He asked with a mischievous grin, prompting laughter from both of them. Reiner, on the other hand, didn't seem particularly interested in the situation. He ate his meal with a calm demeanor, while Berthold sat quietly beside him, discreetly stealing glances at Annie, who was seated across the dinner table. Kaito, having completed the grueling 50 rounds, stretched his body with a satisfied grin. Ah, nothing like that post-workout feeling, he said with a smirk. While he could tap into his vampiric attributes, he had to remember that his body was part human, too. Nothing like a good old exercise routine to keep the human side happy. Kaito knew he couldn't overdo the vampire stuff. He'd pay the price if he did. The loss of his hand in that battle with the smiling Titan was a perfect example. Sure, it grew back in seconds, but it wasn't like he had a secret stash of hands lying around. Equivalent exchange, folks. Regeneration was like a rapid self-heal spell, but it used up his life force to do its thing. Kind of like those Titan shifters, but faster and more chaotic. The downside. If he abused it without giving his body time to recharge, while the risk of dying was the obvious downside, but there were other quirky side effects like premature aging, back pain, and joint issues. You know, all the fun stuff. But what haunted Kaito's nightmares the most was the dreaded, erectile dysfunction. Just the thought sent shivers down his soul. That was something he absolutely wanted to avoid. That's why he had to put in the hard work, strengthen his human side, and hone his skills. That would naturally boost his life force and, in the most literal sense, keep him grounded and connected to Mother Earth. And hopefully, far, far away from any embarrassing supernatural mishaps. Just then, Sasha fell beside him. Since he had been pushing her to run, she had completed her part faster than her canon counterpart. As Kaito carried Sasha towards the mess hall, he couldn't care less about what the instructor might say. He had other priorities, and leaving a cute, potato-loving girl like Sasha hungry was definitely not an option. Screw the rules. She deserved some food after that run. Sasha, who had been drowsy from the long run, was now becoming more alert, realizing she was standing in front of the food line. She looked at Kaito with a puzzled expression. Kaito scratched his head, thinking on his feet. All right, Sasha. Stay here, and I'll get you something to eat. Just pretend like you're waiting in line. Nobody will notice. And remember, this is our little secret. He winked at her, a playful glint in his eye. Sasha, appreciative of his assistance, nodded with a grin. You're a lifesaver, Kaito. As he reached the front of the line, he picked up a couple of bread rolls and then added a bowl of soup to his tray. He acted as though he was going to get food for himself, all the while keeping an eye on Sasha's position. She did a good job pretending to be in line, and no one seemed to pay her any mind. Once he had his food, he returned to Sasha and discreetly handed her the tray. Here you go, Sasha. Enjoy your meal. You earned it. Sasha's eyes widened in appreciation. Wow, Kaito, you're amazing. Thanks so much. She quickly dug into her food, madly savoring the warm soup and bread as if it were her last meal. The training arc starts. I will be skipping quite a lot here as there is little to do here besides slice-of-life fillers. If I ever get the urge, I might add some chapters in between what I am uploading, but not now certainly. NightSpectra _ creators thoughts. 4 comments 0 vote. Angering beauties. The sun beat down on the cadet training grounds, and it seemed like everyone was getting a front row seat to the Kaito and Mikasa comedy hour. Eren and Reiner's brawl is going on as it was in canon, with Eren questioning Reiner why they need to learn combat against each other when their real enemy is Titans. We're soldiers. Reiner said in a deep voice. There are times we can't run away, no matter how bad the situation is. No matter what the enemy is, we have to be ready for it, whether it means using cannons or combat techniques. That seemed to click on some switch in Eren as he turned serious in their clash. Meanwhile, Kaito and Mikasa were putting on a sideshow that had the cadets in stitches. Mikasa, with her trademark laser-focused intensity, launched herself at Kaito with punches and kicks that could have given any Titan a run for its money. But Kaito, that perpetual grin plastered across his face, was as elusive as a cat chasing a laser pointer. Nice try. Kaito teased, each of Mikasa's strikes sailing past him by a hair's breadth. You're like a one-woman titan slaying machine, but you'll have to try harder to catch me. Mikasa's unwavering steely gaze intensified, and she recalibrated her strategy, ready for another round. She lunged, this time with a sweeping kick, but Kaito performed a somersault that would make an acrobat jealous, landing with a theatrical flourish. Almost had me there, Mikasa. He quipped, brushing imaginary dust off his shoulder. But let me show you some real moves. And so he did, with a series of comically exaggerated karate chops and air punches that had the cadets doubled over with laughter. Kaito even threw in an over-the-top spin kick that had Mikasa raising a quizzical eyebrow. Mikasa, despite her disciplined nature, couldn't help but crack a small smile at Kaito's antics. She gathered herself, launched another fierce attack, and this time, her punch connected squarely with Kaito's chest, sending him sprawling to the ground. The cadets erupted into cheers as Kaito lay there, looking up at the sky with an exaggerated groan. Ouch, that's a 10 out of 10, Mikasa. Mikasa extended a hand to help him up, but Kaito seized the opportunity for a little mischief. Instead of accepting her assistance, he smoothly pulled her closer. Mikasa, ever adaptable, tried to maintain her balance, but Kaito had other plans. He subtly nudged her back foot, preventing her from dodging his maneuver. Mikasa found herself falling forward, and in a surprising twist, she ended up on top of Kaito. For a brief moment, their eyes locked, and there was a playful spark in Kaito's gaze. He couldn't resist pushing the boundaries, even in a training exercise. But Mikasa, known for her stoic and disciplined nature, quickly reacted. She swiftly pushed herself up and off Kaito, her expression going cold, a subtle current of anger simmering just beneath the surface. Her dark eyes bore into Kaito with an intensity that could rival even the most fearsome titan. Kaito's humor had clearly crossed a line, and he realized it. He raised his hands in mock surrender, a sheepish grin on his face. Okay, I might have taken it a step too far. My bad, Mikasa. Mikasa, ever the disciplined soldier, took a step back and regained her composure, her earlier smile gone, replaced by a steely determination. Meanwhile, on another corner of the training grounds, Eren and Reiner were in the midst of their own circus. Reiner, always the motivational speaker, was all like, come on, Eren, show Annie what you're made of. Annie had been cruising around like she was on a Sunday stroll and decided to accept the challenge. Eren, all fired up by Reiner's pep talk, charged at Annie like a bulldozer. But Annie wasn't having any of it. With a quick move straight out of her dad's playbook, she swiped Eren's feet out from under him. Eren, realizing the floor was his new best friend, met it headfirst. Annie didn't hang around to bask in her glory. Nope, she turned to Reiner with a smirk that said, your turn, big guy. Reiner, not wanting to make like a banana and split, reluctantly faced off with Annie, who was clearly the ringmaster of this show. Eren, always the instigator, couldn't resist tossing in a few taunts. Do it, Reiner. I thought you wanted to teach her about a soldier's responsibility. Reiner, pumped up by Eren's not-so-helpful words, decided to take the plunge. But, before you could say, mashed potatoes, Annie had him on the ground, showing him how a pro does it. Reiner, his pride in tatters but his sense of humor intact, picked himself up with a sheepish grin. Well, Annie, you've got me there. I guess I need to up my game. That's an amazing technique. Who did you learn it from? Eren asked in amazement. She looked toward the skies, my father. Eren's face showed surprise, your father came up with that move. Annie suddenly looked toward him, why does it matter? The only ones who take it seriously are naive idiots like you or just ordinary idiots. She started walking away. She stopped and, without turning back, said, for some reason, in this world, the better you are at fighting titans, the further you can get from them. Kaito could see her fist clenching. I refuse to be stupid enough to play soldier in this inane world. That last sentence resonated a bit with Kaito. Thrust into this world and forced to survive, he could understand what Annie might be feeling. Annie was now walking away from combat ground. Kaito decided that now was the perfect time to test his moves against Annie. He hadn't gone all out with Mikasa, mainly because he couldn't resist admiring her cold and focused demeanor. But Annie's victory over Eren and Reiner had piqued his curiosity, and he thought, why not give it a shot? Kaito aimed to strengthen the human part by shutting down his vampiric strength, just as he'd been doing throughout his training. He walked up to Annie with a confident grin as he challenged her. Annie, unable to mask her annoyance, rolled her eyes. She thought, can't these people just learn by watching? Can't he see how easily I took down Eren and Reiner? But she was never one to back down from a challenge, and Kaito's audacity had ignited a flick. Annie took a step back and struck a casual pose. She crossed her arms, raising an eyebrow at Kaito, irritation masked by her calm demeanor. You sure about this, Kaito? You've seen what happened to the others. Kaito's playful grin remained firmly in place. Oh, I've seen it all right. But where's the fun in just watching? I want a first-hand experience of what it's like to tangle my body with the infamous Annie Lenhard. The ensuing action was a whirlwind of comedy and combat. Both Kaito and Annie showcased their impressive stamina and strength. But Kaito's true edge lay in his nearly superhuman reflexes and senses. Annie unleashed a flurry of attacks, her fists a blur, as she aimed for precision punches and kicks. Her moves were like a well-oiled machine, executing each strike with deadly precision. But Kaito, with a grin as bright as ever, seemed to dodge every blow by a hair's breadth. He moved like a phantom, swaying and ducking to evade Annie's strikes, making it look like she was trying to catch a wisp of smoke. Annie's frustration was palpable, and her usually composed demeanor began to waver. Kaito's movements took on a dance-like quality, each dodge accompanied by a touch of his signature humor. Missed again, Annie. You're not as tough as they say. Annie, fueled by determination and a hint of annoyance, increased the speed and intensity of her attacks. But Kaito's reflexes were in a league of their own. His grin persisted, and it was evident that he was reveling in the thrill of the challenge. The duel continued, with Annie's frustration growing with each near miss. The training grounds became a spectacle of awe and laughter as Kaito's unorthodox approach clashed with Annie's martial prowess. Finally, Kaito decided he'd had enough of gauging his abilities in this unconventional manner. He paused, catching his breath and momentarily throwing Annie off balance. Seizing the opportunity, Annie launched a swift half-roundhouse kick, aiming it at Kaito. But Kaito, ever the improviser, decided to make things interesting. Annie's powerful kick was aimed at his face, but in a surprising twist, it didn't land where intended. Instead, it landed somewhere quite unexpected, right underneath his arm. Now, Annie was known for her legendary strength and toned thighs. To Kaito, this accidental encounter felt like stumbling upon a hidden paradise in the midst of a training exercise. His expression lit up in surprise and delight, savoring the unexpected sensation. Annie, taken momentarily off guard, was replaced by a surge of anger. But in that precise moment, Kaito leaned in closer, their noses almost touching. He blew a short, hot breath towards her lips as if to say, surprise. Annie, who had briefly been lost in the absurdity of the situation, suddenly snapped back to reality. Her anger surged to the surface, and she jumped with her other leg, attempting to deliver what could have been a lethal blow to Kaito's face. Kaito's reflexes, ever dependable, kicked into overdrive. He swiftly ducked, narrowly evading Annie's attack. It was like a dance move gone awry, a hilarious spectacle that had the cadets on the sidelines in fits of laughter. Kaito, still grinning, leapt back a few steps, putting some distance between him and Annie. He struck a playful pose, arms akimbo as if he were taunting her to engage in another round of their bizarre duel. Annie, her anger unabated, had an expression that was a curious mix of annoyance and bewilderment. She, a highly trained warrior, found herself engaged in a duel more absurd than any training exercise she'd ever encountered. With a sly grin that refused to fade, Kaito decided that a tactical retreat was the best course of action. He turned and started sprinting away from Annie, his legs carrying him as fast as they could. Annie, taken by surprise at Kaito's sudden change in strategy, couldn't react in time. She stood there, watching Kaito sprint away, as the other cadets, bemused by the spectacle, looked on in amusement. As Kaito put more distance between himself and Annie, he couldn't help but chuckle to himself. It was all in good fun, after all. Annie, though initially baffled, quickly regained her composure. She realized that Kaito's antics had turned their duel into a circus performance. As Kaito sprinted away, leaving the chaos behind, he couldn't resist one last mischievous comment. Annie, catch me if you can. I promise it'll be a wild chase. And with that, he disappeared into the distance, his laughter lingering in the air, leaving the cadets in stitches. Annie's eyebrows were twitching in anger. Seeing her, others left her alone, but she could still hear them snickering amongst themselves. Damn you, Kaito Rider, don't let me see you again. Despite saying I won't write training arcs much, here I am. So, how was the chapter? This fanfic is still unrated. It would be very appreciated if you guys could comment a bit more and leave some reviews and ratings. I wanna see it in the ranking charts, guys. NightSpectra _tot creators thoughts.